Today, we're delighted to welcome Tamara Höefer, who is based in Austria, to share their insights and ideas. Thank you for joining us, Tamara.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I wanted to start off with this human conversation and series with asking a human question, which is, how are you feeling today?
Excited. I think it's been kind of exciting recently. I came back from a holiday in South Africa, and that always really revives sort of my mission, I guess, in many ways. And maybe it's been kind of holding on every day right now. It's very, very busy because we're in a period of applying for funding and so on. But it's cool because there are so many exciting projects, opportunities that are open up recently. So yeah, so I'm feeling excited these days.
Yeah, great. And another human question before we get into who we are and our roles and the usual questions, which is, can you tell us a bit about yourself as a human? And when do you feel most alive? I know you mentioned you just come back from South Africa and feel a bit rejuvenated. Tell us a little bit more about what makes you human and when you feel the most alive.
I'm a very extroverted person. A lot of my friends call me an extroverted extrovert for sure. And I think that's exactly that, like the human connections that I can build really, really revive me. I think quite often when I talk about like my past and sort of my experiences and so on, every time I go to a bigger conference or an opportunity where I can connect with people, that really, really revives me and really helps me to like stay grounded. So it's really about like meetings with people. Like this one also, I had one just previously, went for coffee with someone from the Netherlands, and that really cheered me up in a way, but also like revived me. And then maybe just one story, an example. There is a um, justice fighter who also was an anti-apartheid fighter, of course, from South Africa. His name is Albie Sachs, and he's got a exhibition right now in Cape Town about his life and also his exile in Mozambique. And he also was a victim of a car bomb, actually, and lost an arm and an eye, for those who might not know about him. But he actually showed us a tour around his own exhibition, and I met him, and that honestly, that was the kickoff to my year on the 6th of January, I think. And that really, like, that makes me human. How my eyes were sparkling, looking,
Mm.
listening, and so on, and really being sort of touched by his story and fight for justice.
Yeah, it's amazing how, just human connections and interactions can, or even just a simple conversation can really rejuvenate us and make us reconnected to feeling more human.
Definitely.
So I'm going to ask you now, Tamara, just if you can briefly kind of talk a bit about your work, your organisation, how it came about. I know that you started your journey here in the UK and now we're in Austria. So yeah, what's your organisation all about?
Sure. So Richtungswechsel is a charitable association that is based in Austria, but does a lot of work across different European countries. And we are focused on being a collective impact enabler. So we're really trying to build the bridge also between prison systems and also new exciting opportunities, both in terms of supporting leadership within prisons, but also in terms of building new systems that really create leadership possibilities, such as we're also a member of the Rescaled movement, which is advocacy for small-scale community integrated detention houses as replacements of large-scale prisons. And that is exactly what we're working on as well in our advocacy level work. And how that all came about, or how it started, I guess, was, as you say, in the UK, where I studied and then joined the Unlocked Graduates Program and became a prison officer. So I worked in the north of England as a prison officer, and then also did a master's in leadership and custodial environment. And then I returned to Austria to then work on prison research, I guess, at UNODC, so United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And there I really saw this massive gap between international standards and what is the to be and the translation to reality. And by that, I don't mean that people on the ground in the prisons aren't trying to implement these policies and ideas and standards, etc., but more how. And that translation of what is the reality, what are these policies, and where can you build that connection? And that's how I then decided to start Richtungswechsel and try and build that exact bridge, but also be that anchor point in a way where we can hold the network and we can bring people together to then do these projects or create new ways of working inside prisons, but also changing the whole system and institutions as well.
I want a few sort of questions that sort of arise from that. I mean, the first one really talk about sort of leadership, and I'm just really interested in your understanding of that word leadership and how you conceive of that idea. Is it about a role within an organization, or is it something different than that? How do you define leadership?
I think in quite hierarchical places, such as prisons, it is important that there is a certain level in terms of being able to convince, for example, senior management to implement something. So I think that there is a type of leadership that definitely comes with a senior role or even middle management, etc. However, I do believe, and this comes obviously from being an unlocked graduate, I do believe that leadership comes in at every single level and is really important at every level. Because if you're looking at studies that think about movements, you are looking at, for example, there are some initiators like the leaders, then there is like the vast majority that can be convinced to join. There are early adopters of the idea that can like influence the vast majority, and then there are some sort of barriers, people who you probably will not ever be able to get on board with your movement. And you need leaders, especially in prisons, in hierarchies. You need leaders at every single level that can then get these early adopters from their cohort, let's say, from their group, to be able to then pull on the same rope, I guess. And for me, leadership personally, though, is definitely about transparency, honesty. Also, I try to lead with a lot of honesty and just be open to failure. I think that's part of leadership. That's really, really important. Not to be trying to be perfect will always then fail people. So I think that's really what leadership to me is about.
Brilliant. And I wanted to just to reflect on that shift, your experiences in the UK and your experiences in Austria, and what the kind of the main sort of differences that you've seen from your experience of working in the UK system. And is it easier to have a more human system in Austria than the UK? What are your reflections on just that comparison?
I mean, I have to say that although our work is based in Austria, we've also been working a lot in Czechia, for example, and we do different projects in Germany, Malta, and so on. So I've been getting a lot of insights from different countries. And through my work at UNODC, I also was able to have some missions in South Africa, actually, and also in Nigeria. So I've seen a lot of different sort of prison systems and have been speaking to staff as well as incarcerated people in those systems. And interestingly, I find that a lot of it is very, very similar. The structures are very similar. Again, the problems are similar. There are some differences in terms of, for example, in Austria and also Germany, we have a more like law focused system, not in the sense that of course there are laws everywhere and the justice system is built on them, but that, for example, leadership is usually trained through like studying law. There is like fewer people with different backgrounds, especially in the Ministry of Justice. It's very like legal based, which is given our history. Like that's how Austria kind of has been built in the same way as Germany as well. So I see that as a bigger barrier sometimes to implement projects, because if it's not, if there's not a policy for it, we can't really do it. I found it more flexible in the UK, for example. I'm not saying that it's easy in a way at all, but I found more openness to try something, and sort of a little bit more flexibility in new projects or new ideas. And at the same time, like I see that there is the same type of humanity and the same still problems to implement these things in all the countries that I've been working with.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Can I
We
jump
Yeah,
in?
go for it, Jacob.
What can you give us like a couple of examples of like maybe like a project or a scenario where you've connected people together in maybe like one or two countries that you kind of think are like a gold standard for kind of the work that you guys have been doing or been able to help facilitate?
Sure. So one of our current projects is a pilot project, which is a leadership program, which is called Champions Community. So we're working on building different parts of the Champions Community, with the start being the leadership program. But in the future, we're hoping to also have something like hubs and places where we can do events, and people from either the prison system, but also sort of around it, who are, leaders who are eager to contribute to certain reform and projects, etc., can connect. But the leadership program specifically is now piloted in Czechia, in Germany, in Bremen specifically, and in Malta. And there we have our champions who are sort of middle managers or senior officers in their respective prisons. They come together, they undergo the growth training process from Dr. Sarah Lewis and her team at Grow, Transform, Belong. And we facilitate sort of like the connections in their countries with a mentor that is local. And at the same time, we also do these residential trainings where they undergo that training, but they also all come together. So they're visiting each other's countries, they're visiting each other's prisons, they see different things that work that they can implement. And at the same time, they undergo that training and have sort of assignments to complete inside their prisons. And we've been seeing that, like, it's very early doors. They're just going on the second residential next week, but even the first residential has been incredibly human, actually, in the way that only on day one already, people were bonding. They'd never met before. It was such a great experience when on Wednesday, somebody else came in who hadn't met the group before. They were really surprised that they just met on the Monday, 2 days earlier. And they, on the Thursday, actually, were talking about, well, if you need something from Czechia, like, just call us. We're happy to help you and connect. And all of that was just showing really that we need that investment. We need to show the staff that they can change something, they can grow themselves as well as implement something in their institutions. And that's really where I see the connections that we're making.
Yeah, definitely. It's and because prisons by design, they're quite insular, aren't they? And being able to just meet different people from different countries, visit different prisons, learn about other systems and how other people do things can be quite a simple way of getting people to think more creatively and to problem solve in a kind of more confident way, both at senior leadership and middle management, or even as general prison officer on the landing.
Exactly. And also, it feels like it's all about empowerment, right? Like, if you're isolated and you feel like you're the only one in that prison thinking that way or wanting to do something different, then you will not be able to start something. But if there's suddenly 3, 4 of you in the same prison, and you're getting like support through a mentor, through an extra program where you can also compare yourself with the other countries and with your progress, that is motivating and that is empowering. And I think that's really crucial.
And we're going to be chatting to Dr. Sarah Lewis later today for an
Oh,
interview.
amazing.
So
Well,
we'll be
then
able
I
to
hope she also
hear more
talks
about
about
it.
that.
So I love that connection. We invited you, Tamara, to bring along an object that represents a moment of humanness in your work. Could you tell us what you've brought along and why?
Yeah, so I brought actually my Unlock Graduates mug.
Excellent.
That's for many reasons. I think, first of all, I really wanted to bring something from Unlocked because the program is so dear to me in many ways. I would have never found my passion. I would have never founded my organization. I wouldn't have even thought about working in prisons, to be very honest, if it wasn't for Unlocked. So I think that's just really, really important to a part of me and who I am. At the same time, it reminds me of where I'm coming from. It reminds me that I've been a prison officer, and it reminds me that, sort of not to forget that, and not to forget the staff and the people, which is really, really important to me, from a personal, experience perspective, but also because quite often reform can talk a lot about blame as well, and it can always, the blame tends to then go, even when we're talking about the police, it goes on police officers, and of course, like, it's very, very important to challenge behaviors, to challenge like things that are going wrong, whilst also realizing that a lot of issues come from sort of systems and the systemic background, basically, that enable certain behaviors, and sometimes even encourage. And so that's also part of the reason why I wanted to bring sort of my unlocked token. And then two more reasons. One more is that I think symbols are very important. If you feel part of a movement, if you feel part of something bigger than yourself, that's motivating. And it motivates me on difficult days when I don't know where the next funding will come from and how we're going to implement changes. Then I just need to need to remind myself that I'm part of like groups such as the Undergraduates Ambassadors Network, but also other organizations like Rescaled. Like, that gives me power and it gives me joy, and I think that's really important. And then the last point is, it's a mug, and we know that in England, especially in the prison service, a cuppa is very important, and I think that also speaks to humanity. Like, as I said, I love connections, I love building relationships, and I think you can do that best over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and that's part of that. So it's really about sitting down, getting to know the other person, and that enables a lot of other things that we're doing. And I think that's also kind of our USP in a way as an organization, that we have a really strong, especially European network, and that's where things become possible when you're having that cuppa, or you're having a meal together, that grows ideas and it grows connection.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important point there. One, I'm speaking at the Unlock conference next week, so yeah, it'll be great to be back with them. They've done a lot of great work, and secondly, as a campaigner, a prison reform advocate for many years, what I realized is the importance of a brand and community and fellowship. If you're going to problem solve effectively, if you're going to do anything of any significance, and I think you've just touched on an area of community that is really important and often goes under the radar, because often people think, oh, you need a community of people to mobilize and to be heard as a collective, and to to push forward policy recommendations, or to brainstorm ideas and to make change happen. But I think what you've identified there is that underlying part of community that brings a lot of value, which is feeling like you belong to a kind of a fellowship of people, so that when you are alone on the landing, or when you are at home at your desk, that there's still that mug there that reminds you of you're part of something bigger, or that can remind you to give you momentum, and to keep the fuel and the fire going, because often the places that we work can be quite dehumanizing and can be people can burn out. I've met a lot of people that can burn out, myself included, which I'll be honest about. It can feel like there isn't any light at the end of the tunnel at times. So I think that community and that fellowship are very important, both locally and internationally.
I couldn't agree more. Like, it's not always that mobilization for action, but also just like knowing there's others and they're also doing their thing, and that's really, really good, and we're part of it together, and that's important.
And following on from that, drawing on your experience, what environments and relationships best support humanness, would you say?
Again, those where you can build real relationships. I mean, I have worked in so many different countries now. I've worked with so many different organizations, And it really narrows down to one human often, like the changes that you're able to make. If there's one human that has been working with you, that believes in you, that shows you ways of changing, then that will happen. And so I think it comes back to being able to have the time to build relationships, and also, yeah, maybe not being on a wing by yourself with 70 people, because then you can't build meaningful relationships, and they should be meaningful. And you should also realize that you will not be able to have meaningful relationships with everyone. You will have a better vibe, so to speak, with some people, and you'll get on better. And there will be others that you will be, yeah, struggling with to build that relationship, and you don't have to force that every time. But I think environments where you can build relationships, but also where there is enough diversity to be able to connect with different people differently, that helps to really build humanness, I guess. And at the same time, it's also about self-realization. How can you make a decision about your own life? How much can you say? And we know that prison systems tend to strip all of that autonomy away from you, as somebody who's incarcerated. And often also the autonomy of staff. How much real change or ideas can you implement if you're a band 3 prison officer? And yes, you can actually, but it's about knowing how, and it's about like coming together. And so I think the humanness about the environment is then really like how much self-realization and how much relationship can you bring into the environment.
And would you say there are like specific roles within justice systems or within prisons specifically that from in any country that, so like for example in a school, I would say that, you know, pastoral support kind of is more able to have those more human resolving conflicts, more time and capacity to have those types of relationships. In terms of prison design and the roles within prisons across countries that you've worked in, would you say there are particular roles that where people are more enabled to kind of build those more human-centered relationships as opposed to, I don't know, senior leadership team or governors?
I mean, I have to say that I do believe that even prison officers can like and do that all the time, and actually are in a unique spot simply because they are there 24/7. And I think that gives you a very unique possibility to build that relationship. Of course, understaffing, overcrowding, these kind of issues then result in not being able to build relationships with everyone. But I think you're in a very unique position to build quite strong relationships with some incarcerated people. At the same time, though, when you're speaking about being enabled, I don't think that the hierarchy, also being in uniform, often enables that. So if I have to then sort of shift that, I would definitely say that pastoral care is also in prison something that is quite important and definitely supports humanness and enables the roles enable that. And then also I've seen a lot of external organizations, like any external organization coming in, quite often has like more opportunities to build human connections, simply because they are not part of the hierarchy, they're not part of the decision-making process, but they're bringing something different into the environment. And they're sort of the bridge to outside communities as well. And I think that's really great. And one example where I see something really human building is in one prison that I've been sort of working with. They have an outside organization doing some sort of training and education on political education, but they're bringing in prison officers, Band 3 officers, into the course as well. And in that course, the staff they're not wearing uniform. And I think that's amazing. Like those kind of like taking it out, giving another space that enables human connection.
Yeah, great. And I think you touched on time, and the other thing that you touched on there is consistency. And I wondered, in the past, I will hold my hand up and say, I've visited a lot of prisons, and often I've just dropped in and dropped out, and I've built really authentic human relationships with these people, and I've left the gates, and sometimes I felt like guilty that I've had to leave and I can't see them again. And so I'm just wondering, like, how we strike that balance, as you say, because people outside organizations and that partnership working and developing those, bringing in external providers of programs or speakers or facilitators, people with experience, whoever they are. I think the more diversity that you can bring into a prison, whether that's even just the public, perhaps, to and family, in terms of reducing those barriers and creating more diversity in the prison, is always helpful. But is there a word of caution in terms of if they can't do the consistency bit, or do you think it brings enough value bringing in a lot of external people who aren't in uniform? How do you think there's a balance to be struck there, or do you think it's just always has enough benefit just bringing new people in, new faces, having more diversity?
That's a question I ask myself a lot as well. So I don't think there's a direct answer per se, because on the one hand, I do believe that by just doing, in a way, like by just initiating, by trying to do programs with whatever you have, is great. And you should definitely be doing that. At the same time, especially prisons are obviously, as we already established, like often quite dehumanizing spaces with little autonomy for people incarcerated. And so things like consistency and meaningful relationships are very, very important, which is actually part of the reason, I guess, I joined Unlocked and also founded my organization, because we see that the staff really need to be the multipliers of all of that. And if they're not, it becomes much harder to be able to, not be just something that, oh, another organization that just came and forgot about us again. Another organization or a person that I thought we had a meaningful relationship with, and they just left, because everyone in my life leaves. I think that's a very common experience from talking to a lot of people with lived experience. And at the same time, that's where I think the people who are in the system can make really the biggest difference, because it can mean that, for example, there can be regular engagements with outside organizations, but something must stick from that, and that can stick through the staff, and that's where that translation can happen, even if the outside organization doesn't have the capacity or even opportunity to come more regularly.
I think you've touched on a critical point there, in terms of that's where I guess the leadership comes in. Because yes, you can commission as many outside organizations to come in. You can, every Tom, Bob, and Harry to come through the door and contribute to the prison environment and culture. But I guess you need an overarching goal or a vision for how that's going to be a net contributor, and how it's going to, and how that's coordinated with the staff on the ground to be able to, as you describe it beautifully, multiply that human connection or that relationship or that service.
Yes.
And with that in mind, this is one of my favorite ones. We can start imagining now this question. If you had a magic wand and we had a transformed human justice system, what would be happening? What would it look like? And how would it feel and sound?
Also a very difficult question. I've been pondering a lot. First of all, I think it needs to be client-centered, so to speak. So people who are in conflict with the law should be really the ones sort of navigating the system and being able to like feed back to the system what is needed, how it's needed, how it can work. I think it comes from, we like to strip autonomy from a lot of groups, women included. If we're looking at Equalities Act, I think there's a great list of people with different backgrounds that we're just stripping their autonomy away because we don't believe that they can decide for themselves or make decisions that are right for the collective. And I think that's exactly where it starts. Like, it should be decision making from a collective. Of course, there will be some safeguarding issues, and of course, there are some things that you need to think about, but that shouldn't take away the opportunities of being able to, decide, feedback, organize, etc. So I think that's really, really crucial. At the same time, I honestly just think that it needs to be more open to the public. It needs to be more transparent, but also the public needs to understand more what is going on in justice systems at large, and also question them, because quite often I see that people who are working, who are not working in the system, or the wider sort of justice system as well, they just pretty much believe everything is working anyway. Like, I'm just trusting that, law underlies our whole system. And so I believe in that, and that must be working. And I think it's also about being able to have questions, and then they should be answered. Why is there so often this, like, almost like I wouldn't call it a roller coaster. I would call it something like a maze of trying to get information about things, just to be able to actually like close things off. And I think if the justice system was more open, transparent, if we could like create more of that, also, as I said earlier, like community links and bridges, then it could be more of an ecosystem. It could be that it's easier if you're working, I don't know, in schools or somewhere else, to then connect with the justice system and like help each other out in a way, because we can't carry everything in the justice system ourselves. And at the same time, also, it often feels that when you're in the justice system, you're siloed, not only in terms of being out of sight, out of mind, and like closed off places, but also quite specifically, you're suddenly out of certain budgets. You're suddenly out of certain opportunities that shouldn't be related. You should still be able to get all of that. So I think it's also a justice system for me that would thrive on humanness, would also thrive of like networks, relationships, again, with other organizations, and really understand that it's an ecosystem around you that is not part of the justice system, but that influences you. Health, social affairs, education. There are so many things, green, sustainability, and that needs to be integrated. And I would love to just swing a wand and do that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to come sort of on that really, and just sort of ask you whether you have seen examples of, you talked about autonomy and collective decision making for people impacted by the justice system. Have you seen kind of pockets of the future, examples of that happening in any of the countries that you've worked across? And also, have you seen examples or pockets of the future around that kind of whole ecosystem approach that you talked about, that connection with community happening? And if so, where?
Yes. So I will give an example that might be a bit unusual. So in one of the prisons in Nigeria, it was quite interesting because when I visited, there were, I mean, it's massively overcrowded. I think at the time it was 70% awaiting trial of the whole population. So obviously that's very tough because you can't really work with a lot of people awaiting trial in many ways. Like, I mean, that's the same in the UK and Austria as well, and so on. But interestingly, in this one prison, they called it actually a correctional center. And actually, the prison service had changed all the prisons' names into correctional center. But when I entered this one correctional center, they quite specifically, and I mean, the incarcerated people told me, we've been to different prisons and so on. This is the first correctional center we've been in. And although I don't like the term correctional center for many reasons, and we can talk about that later, I want to highlight that the reason for that was, A, it was much smaller than the other systems, which again helps with building human connection, individualization, relationships, decision-making even, etc. Second, it was also led by a governor who was really keen on human relationships and was really leading his staff that way. and teaching his staff to, again, build relationships with all the incarcerated people, because it also helps, obviously, with relational security, but also with support. And the third part, which I found super incredible, which was part of the community building, I guess, every person, and these were men, so every man who was released, the governor would go with him to his family, and tell them that, this is how we worked with him, this is who he is now, to fight against stigmatization, would be, because that's a large issue, especially in Nigeria, but obviously, unfortunately, everywhere else as well. And so it's not, I don't want to say it's perfect, there's still a lot of issues, etc., but it had these three components that I found so interesting and great. The small scale, the relationships and leadership of staff, and then the community bridge. And I think that's really where it kind of where it lies. And I mean, there are these pockets and these great practices all over the place, but they always hinge on humans. They always hinge on one person. There've been amazing projects that have been going on, and then one person left the prison, or the person retired, and suddenly a 10-year-long great engagement with an outside organization, for example, just stopped because there was no sort of handover, or nobody else could do it. And I think that's really what I've seen, like great humans who are like trying to build bridges, and are not letting themselves to be stopped by systems that are around them.
Yeah, and that fits really nicely, Tamara, with my next question, really, about what do you think it would take to move forward towards this sort of imagined future that you want to see? What sort of gets in the way, and how can we overcome some of those barriers to build those bridges that you've talked about? What will work to kind of scale up and to spread these ideas? I know you're involved in Rescaled as well, which obviously is around promoting small scale detention across Europe. Is that sort of movement building part of the solution?
I definitely, the first thing, even before you mentioned Rescaled, was Rescaled, because when we were starting our work and we were thinking about leadership and staff training and so on, when I came across Rescaled, it just made sense on so many levels. Not only in terms of, obviously, clients, in terms of the incarcerated folks who are in these detention houses, but also for staff who can then realize these human connections. I mean, I would say that around 8 out of 10 people applying for the prison service would say that one of the reasons that they are applying is they want to work with people. Otherwise, it's probably not the job for you. And at the same time, when you then are in the systems, again, due to hierarchies and size, you can't actually realize that to the same extent that you might have wished for. And so I do believe that small scale, differentiated, community integrated detention houses will enable a lot of these changes, because they are, again, small scale, which means there is not a hierarchy of people that you would actually have to get through to make a decision, which is, I believe, where a lot of projects, ideas, opportunities fail. Also, in terms of time, actually, when there is not such a huge decision hierarchy, again, you have decisions more quickly. If it takes you half a year to approve of something, the momentum is gone. And that's really important, that you actually can just, you have maybe 2 more people that can approve a decision, and then you can just go ahead with it. And then also the differentiation in detention houses, to be able to focus on different things, maybe to be run by different organizations that have a different, focus in a way, because not every person will, again, get on with the program of a specific place. And being able to, like, not choose that, but like designate where there could be a good progression, a good program for somebody, and a good fit, I think could be incredible. So that's like on the Rescaled front. At the same time, obviously, that's hard to implement, because you need to really make sure that you're not net widening, you're actually replacing large scale prison facilities. But another part is you need to, again, I think we need to get much better in our public perception work. It's something that nobody talks about because it's not attractive to talk about. It's not a sexy political topic either, but we need to make it one. We need to be loud enough, and we need to bring people into our collective that are unlikely allies, people that you would have never thought about. Like, we're writing a project right now that we're handing in for the European Commission, and actually, out of 14 people in the consortium, 8 organizations have never worked with prisons or anything like that. They're social enterprises, they do work in digital skills, in green, like sustainability skills, in entrepreneurship. And we're just deciding, yeah, and you should focus on the justice system, and we're just making you now. And I think that's really, really important as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I think the unlikely allies is such a crucial point, and reaching out, bridging gaps between people who may never have thought of, and I think that broader social value, social impact with organized corporations, organizations, is starting to shift that conversation as well. I don't know if you see that across Europe.
Everywhere, I would say. It definitely is starting to shift, and also at the same time, it creates even more opportunities. If we're, again, I'm coming back to the justice ecosystem. It should just be including so many different parts of life to really make it human.
Yeah, fascinating. And with my other hat on as co-founder of the Common Ground Justice Project, which is our whole remit is around finding common ground across political divides, across the political spectrum, both with parliamentarians, business, the public at large, to engage and people in those public perception debates, and trying to bridge those divides and find common ground on justice areas and policies. So sometimes as I'm having conversations like this one, I'm always thinking, if I was playing devil's advocate, what would I say from a conservative lens, or what would I say? Because I understand that we have to bring everybody on that journey with us if we're going to imagine a more human justice system. And another thing that you mentioned earlier on, and I'm going to ask you about what you think your top 3 most important things are that need to change, or like top 3 barriers. And we've named a lot, but one that I was thinking about just now was that when you were saying about transparency, about accountability, about good leadership, but also not falling into that trap that many of us, people who are liberal, so we say, or on the left, would fall into the trap of being hypocritical sometimes, because when we call out, the prison service or governments or areas within the justice system that aren't working, we're taking the same approach to blaming and shaming that the justice system is doing to the people in custody, which we don't agree with. And so there's a kind of something to be mindful of that I've seen in terms of us as a collective fighting for that change. Can we do it in a way that isn't punitive, which is what we don't agree with, or that isn't causing more harm, or that isn't shaming people? Because as we know, when you shame somebody, they're less likely to be accountable and to take accountability and to be transparent. Actually, it erodes trust and erodes those relationships. And so we've got to be quite strategic in the way we build those relationships in the future, and work towards kind of making those pockets of good practice in the future more widespread. But what would you say are kind of some of those areas and big barriers to extending those good areas of pockets of good practice more broadly?
I mean, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for putting that into words, because it's something that I've been feeling so strongly about. And it's very difficult because, again, like, I come from an operational background. So I was the bad guy in a way for a lot of people that I've worked with who are abolitionists, for example. Like, the first instinct, like, they meet me and then they find out I was a prison officer, and they're just like calculating in their brains how it works, how it's possible, because I seem nice, and I think that's something where I'm just always trying to say exactly that. Like, yes, Of course, there should be accountability. Of course, we need this and this and this to change. Of course, there's also a lot of individual blame to some extent, yeah. But we need to, again, like as you say, like shift the perspectives there and not do the same, yeah, not do the same thing. I think that's exactly where we're trying to work to kind of advocate and say, well, it's if you're just going and you're just saying, demanding this and that, and you're just saying like this is wrong, which you're all right about, you will not change the system. And I think that's exactly where we sit. And also about the Common Ground Justice Project, I actually was at the Perry Lectures in June last year, and one of your colleagues presented, and I've been since like on your newsletter, and I've been following it because I think it's just exactly what I'm about. Personally also, because we will not be able, it's unrealistic to be able to change things if we're not trying to like get other perspectives on board as well. And I do find that actually the leadership work, for example, does, and the staff work does kind of ring well and bode well with different parties and different representatives, in the sense that you can say, well, on the one side, it's obviously about additional training, it's about support of, at the end, it's about the multiplication, as I said, like for people who are incarcerated. But it's also about, the staff themselves, like and the hardworking people who are like putting their lives in very difficult positions quite often, and can also be hurt, that they will get support as well. And so these kind of two things, they don't need to they don't need to be exclusive to each other, let's say. But if I had to like say three, as you said earlier, like three things, it's transparency, for sure. It's, again, like shifting from a blame culture to a growth culture. That would be very, very crucial. And then finally, I would probably say it's also about attraction. And let me explain that. I think if you're a system that isn't open, that is talked about very negatively in public perception, who are you attracting to that system at the end of the day? And I'm not questioning like the large pool of staff who are so dedicated to really, really make a difference and every day turn up and trying to like do something different. But it's also about like really understanding that the whole system could be much more connected if it seemed connected, because it would then attract people who also want to create that. And I think that's also part of, again, Unlocked, attracting people that would have never thought about working in the prison service to it.
Definitely, yeah. That recruitment and how we make it more attractive, how we widen the net to the talent pool of people entering, and what you were saying earlier as well about how do we make prisons more visible instead of invisible, both from a public perception in the media and in terms of just having more diversity of people coming in and building those relationships. We've heard that you work across different countries. How do you actually go about this, and what value does it bring to your work, being able to like experience being in all these different countries?
I think I said it earlier, our network is really our USP in a way. And that's really where working across different countries showcases best practices. It shows possibilities. It creates a sense of urgency, I think, because if you say, well, this is normal in that country, why isn't it normal here? That really, really drives us and what we can advocate for. Again, it also is part of that, as we said earlier, movement building. It's about being part of something bigger, and where you feel like, okay, if they're struggling there and there and there, then we can do this together. We're all working towards the same goal. And that's really that human connection. But really the crucial part about working across different countries is that you can convince people to jump on it when it exists somewhere else. It's so hard to imagine a different justice system when there's no examples anywhere else. And it doesn't have to be, because I frankly don't think it exists yet. It doesn't have to be the perfect system. It doesn't have to be the system where you say, oh yeah, they've got it down, we should just copy and replicate. But it's these, again, pockets of good practice which we can take and adapt to our current system that have been working quite well. And especially in our rescaled advocacy, doing study visits, being able to also do projects in different countries, getting input from our partners in our advocacy, etc., is otherwise it wouldn't be possible, frankly. So I think that our country, like working across countries, is our greatest benefit. And then a funny anecdote: recently we got asked to join a quite big national project for prison reform. I can't talk more about it yet, but hopefully when it goes through, that'll be great for us as an organization, not only in terms of what we can do in the project, but also in terms of, I guess in terms of our status also. But we were actually asked to join because of our network. And I had to laugh at the time, because I was just thinking to myself, we're this really quite small charity, but we're asked by two bigger partners that are very well established in Austria, to join the project, to bring in our network, our international perspectives, etc. And that really, it really brought home that yes, I was feeling it, but it's being seen as well.
Mm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, yeah, a real sort of credit to, your humanness and the way that you have built those human connections to build that network. And then the openness to, like you said, work with unexpected allies, with others, to collaborate. And I think what you said about those sort of pockets of the future, we tend to think of the future that's sort of separate than the current, but actually there are these pockets that are happening here, but they're often not amplified. We don't know about them. So sort of playing that role in amplifying and sharing across different countries, as that sort of bridge and that connector, is such a vital role that your organisation plays. I just wanted to end, with a couple of questions. One, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, really, like, you're doing a lot. This is a lot that you're also doing. How do you, as a human being, kind of look after yourself? And, when you're doing these challenges work, when you're hitting these barriers, when you've got all these great ideals and vision for the future, and then you can get, not get funding, or these different barriers that you're going to, come across in your day-to-day work. How do you look after yourself? How do you keep going?
So again, human relationships. So I've been so privileged to have a family and a circle of friends that are extremely supportive, that look after me. And I wouldn't have been able to join Unlocked, never mind be a prison officer. I wouldn't have been able to do all the things that I'm doing now if I didn't have my own home network that is always supporting me, that I can actually rely on. If it all fails, what's the worst thing? I still have them. They will support me. Even if, it all fails and I need some financial support, I have some, not a lot, but it's some support that I can rely on. And that's a huge privilege. And I think people don't openly talk about that. People who are, who are founders or who've created their own movements, etc., like, they quite often have something that they're relying on, and quite often that is their own human network. And of course they've built things themselves, of course they've built their human network as well, but that privilege of, like, being able to, if it all fails, like, where do I go, having an answer to that is really important. And that definitely, without it, I don't know if I would be here talking to you right now. And I probably wouldn't be so passionate about it because I couldn't be. And I think, like, I could give you more answers in terms of, sports and other things that I'm excited about, etc. But if I had to narrow it down, it is my human network around me, and also people that aren't related to the work. I think it's both important, like the ones that are in the work, in the movement, keeping me going, empowering me, my reminders, etc., but then like the others that are still there, that are part of it, that are supporting me, but on a very different level.
Yeah, absolutely. Those personal and professional networks together,
Yes.
really sort of holding you up. Amazing. And just finally, for people listening to this, have you got any recommendations for them for, if they're interested in, building a more human justice system, what should they be watching, listening to, reading that will help to really kind of spark that interest and amplify the examples that you've been talking about?
I think it's about, again, talking to people. And what I mean specifically is like, if you find a story interesting, reach out to that person. If you want to find out more about an organization, reach out to them. The worst thing is you don't get a reply really, or a no, which I find rare in this environment. And the best thing is that you get more insights, more information, and you find out more pieces that might bring you the passion, where you can say, okay, yeah, this part, this is where I want to shift something. This is where I want to like, pull a trigger maybe, or whatever it might be. So not being afraid to go to different events when possible, but also not being afraid to reach out via email. I think that's really, that's brought me a lot of opportunities and knowledge. And I think at the same time, there's obviously like a lot of recommendations out there. And I do believe that like literally following some people on LinkedIn that you find interesting, reading books that you might not usually read. So one is Incarceration Nations by Dr. Buzz Dreisinger that I can definitely recommend. And
Great read. Inspired me.
There's just so many things. And I mean, one example, actually, I might just show that quickly. So this is Justice Edwin Cameron. He was a Supreme Court judge. He's now also at JICS, so that's the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services, or at least he was last year. I just reached out to him and we had a call like a year ago, and since then like his staff came to Austria and so on, just on the whim. And then it was funny because it's just above my desk, this book, and then suddenly we're on a Teams call and his face is here and his face is there, and I think it's really about talking to people, finding out their background, their story, what drives them, can help you find out what helps you and what drives you.
Love that, making those human connections using that technology, and to connect with people internationally has never been so easy, I think, now to sort of make those international connections. Exactly. Thank you so much, Tamara, for that was really fascinating. It just hit on so many different elements of being human yourself, how you bring humanness into your organization, and your experiences across all those different countries, and trying to pull that all together and thinking about the individual humans, but also those kind of systemic issues. How can we make the system more human? Any final words, Jacob?
No, just thank you so much, Tamara. It's been a pleasure connecting, and look forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing. As you said, it's all about making those human connections, keeping in contact, joining fellowships. And then for the listeners, thank you for listening. We hope you found it useful. Let us know what stood out for you in the conversation. What are your top 3 things that you think are barriers? What keeps you grounded? What are the pockets of good practice that are happening now that we should be replicating in the future? Join the conversation. We look forward to seeing you at the event, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you so much.
And the future is human.
It is.